So welcome to Raising Consciousness Now Telesummit and webinar today. I'm Veronica Tracy-Smith, your host, and I'm here with Rima Bonario. And welcome, everyone. We're really glad that you could join us today. I want to say that I'm very excited about this webinar today. People have been asking for more on relationships, and Rima Bonario is going to talk about the relationships, the shadow in relationships, and the journey to conscious connection, and really about creating resilient relationships. So, Rima, thank you for being here. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I'm really excited as well and glad to be with you today.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, Rima, we did an interview with you, Rima, before, and so people can watch the interview, and we have that. I believe that one's on YouTube. If not, you can find it on Raising Consciousness Now. And Rima is a member of the Raising Consciousness Now group, and she's a team member and has been for a founding member, and she's a dynamic spiritual leader, author, and speaker who is passionate about accelerating personal and professional and planetary transformation. And that's really what we're about at Raising Consciousness Now. So if you're just new to us and you haven't read many of our articles or seen our webinars, there's some amazing people, and you can learn a lot just by going through the summit that we had last year. It's all video. We have a TV channel on YouTube, which is Consciousness Now TV. Rima is the co-author of The Art and Practice of Living with Nothing and No One Against You, a workbook offering readers a 21-day transformative practice called the Q Process. Rima travels across North America presenting inspiring interactive workshops that support people in becoming their best selves. And Rima holds a master's degree in strategic communications and leadership from Seton Hall University and is a doctoral student at Hollis University Graduate Seminary studying transformational psychology, the best kind of psychology, I believe. Mm-hmm. She's an expert group facilitator and a certified coach for the Spiritual Intelligence Assessment, and that's where I met Rima about, 3.5 years ago or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah. Rima's ability to mix inspired storytelling and spiritual teachings, transformational psychology, and brain science makes her a powerful, sought-after speaker and teacher, and we're so lucky to have you as part of the Raising Consciousness Now group and also on the webinar today. So, Rima, I'm going to let you take over. I know you've got some beautiful presentation, beautiful slides, and you're going to teach us more about how we can create resilient relationships. So thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for that wonderful introduction. I am indeed very blessed and happy to be here today and sharing this body of work that's come out of my time working on my doctorate and heading right now into my research. I'm in the research phase of my work, and will be finishing up my dissertation within the next 6 to 8 months. So I'm very excited about sharing some of the earlier pieces that are coming together from that work with everybody today. And as I have been working on the whole body of transformative psychology, which is really about looking at people who are in a place of relative function, high function or relative health, but who feel as though there are places that they could improve and get even better, where we're not talking about serious dysfunction as the starting point, but people who've managed to cope thus far pretty well, and they know there's something more that they can get from their lives. And so that's certainly been true in my life, and in particular in my relationship. My husband and I have had a commitment to not settle for anything but the very best that we could experience in our relationship, which if you're interested or doing any spiritual growth, you know that that's sort of like a call for trouble in a way, because when one sets the intention to grow, then everything that we need in order to shake loose the stuff that needs to be gotten rid of shows up in our lives, and that can be a bit of a bumpy ride, but it's certainly been worth and continues to be worth the effort. And in addition, from my own personal experience, this information I'm going to be sharing today comes from a variety of specialists and people who are very keyed into the notion of psychology and the developmental psychology, psychospiritual psychology, the psychology of the healthy self, of the differentiated and actualized self. Everybody from Jung and Maslow through Scott Peck and Kristen Neff's work, some Peter Levine's work you're going to see in here, as well as some work from Harville Hendricks, as well as Robert Keegan's work on his stages of development. All of that informs what we're going to talk about today. So the presentation is called The Shadow in Relationship, The Journey to Conscious Connection, and we're going to start where most relationships start, which is in what I call the magical mist. The magical mist is a beautiful time in relationships. Sometimes you could think about it as the norming phase if you're thinking about it in terms of group dynamics in an office setting, because this is sort of true whether we're talking about intimate relationships, friendships, relationships with children, parents and children, or relationships at work. There's often this beginning time when we first meet people, and something magical happens when we have that moment of connection. And in intimate relationships, we call that, quote, falling in love. You know, this idea, and you think of all of our love songs, you know, Lost in Love, and, you know, the idea of just becoming blissed out and feeling blessed. And the technical term for it is cathecting. And it's a time where all of our guards get dropped and we just allow ourselves to become fully connected and immersed with another person. And I call this time a period of unconscious connection because we're not really choosing it consciously. What is happening, though, is that we are experiencing moments of connection. It may feel very conscious, but more often than not, it really feels like, wow, this came out of nowhere. I got hit by a Mack truck when I met this person, and I just knew, you know, I got starstruck. And when we get into relationship at that point, we start to have very natural experiences of feeling deep connection with this person. We are looking for similarities and commonalities. We enjoy feeling understood and feeling seen by this person. Basically, we're building a shared life, shared experiences, and really feeling less alone in the world. And this is a very, very attractive place. And this is what I also call the time of the captured heart, where we are connected in this sort of unconscious, blissful place. And the point of it is to get into connection. And so some of what happens there is we find ourselves less looking at the differences. Maybe we're completely unaware of the differences, in part because we just don't have much information about this other person yet. And all we can see is the great ways that our values are matching up. They feel like a soulmate. You know, we love to do the same things. We laugh at the same jokes. You know, we enjoy the same kinds of movies. All of these things oftentimes go into our assessment that, wow, we have really met the right person for us. And psychologically and biologically at this point, the brain is not looking for differences. So we may be actively denying differences or ignoring differences or minimizing differences, but more often than not, it's just part of the natural process of confecting. And everything seems great. We might have a lot of lust and attraction going on as well. So we're in this place of the captured heart. And this can last quite a while. I think the longest time I ever remember being in that place was about a whole 2 years in relationship. Sometimes it goes by much faster for people who have done relationships before and they're sort of familiar with the process we're going to be talking about today, this cathecting period might go by actually quite quickly. So usually what happens is we step into a time of change. The winds of change begin to blow, and so sometimes there's a change in relationship status, such as we become parents, or we decide to go study and not see other people, or we also might get married, or something goes on that changes in the relationship, and maybe it's just for one person. Maybe they get a raise, or they move to a more stressful job. Whatever case, usually what starts here is that conflict and challenge begin to arise. We have a little bit more information about the person we're with, and we begin to see that maybe it's not all a garden of roses, that there seem to be a few little thorns in here, and fear can start to begin to creep in, and we can be in what's sometimes called a place of unconscious disconnection now, where we are unconsciously beginning to sort of backpedal a little bit, and or at least begin to assess, maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And as we become more and more aware of the differences that show up in relationships, and for some people this could even take, may take some relationships 10 years before, or much longer, before they move fully through that place of wondering into full-on the desert of disconnection. And this is a time that really feels dry and arid in the relationship, where it's almost as though all we can see now are the differences. And not only can we see them so clearly, but they create fear in us. We are afraid of these differences. We might feel hurt or angry or confused when they show up. There's that feeling, even if we don't verbalize it, that, oh my gosh, you have changed. You're not the person that you used to be. And a lot of feelings of aloneness will come up at this time in the relationship. And that can be extremely painful, the sense of I'm with someone, but I feel so alone. And that's a difficult time. And for some people, it can go even beyond the feelings of fear and aloneness into this sense of, wow, I sure got fooled. You fooled me, or I let myself be fooled. And that can create a sense of being somehow in a spiral of shame. And now we begin to consciously disconnect from our partner. We might find ourselves retreating and holding back. We might find ourselves withholding love or affection, or maybe we begin to withhold sex or money or time. We begin to feel fully that the connection feels broken. Something feels really wrong and off, and sometimes we even feel like we are living a little secret life, like our interior life is completely different from our exterior life. And this is a moment when people look around and think, wow, if people really knew what it was like on the inside, maybe our relationship looks terrific to everyone else, but to me, sitting where I am, this is not good. I feel threatened. And maybe there is a lot of acting out going on. There's it's beginning to be, these conflicts are beginning to show up more and more regularly. And this can sort of be like the storming side of, we're moving out of norming and into storming, if you're familiar with that particular terminology. And for relationships, it can be a time where we land in what I like to call the swamp of struggle, where we're longing to go back to that place of unconscious connection where we first were. We're wishing we could have that sense of sameness again, and maybe we take the route of trying to change our spouse, the whole nagging thing, the constant criticism, shaming, blaming, resentment shows up here. Or we could take the approach that says, gosh, there must be something wrong with me if this isn't working out. I must need to change. And we start trying to contort ourselves in every possible direction when our spouse is angry when we have this certain behavior, we decide, well, okay, I won't do that behavior anymore, and that will make them happy. And okay, no, now our spouse is criticizing us for this over here, and so we decide, okay, well, I'm going to try to do more of this thing that they really like, and that will make them happy. And we get into this place where suddenly now we have lost completely who we are, and we're trying to contort ourselves into something that's going to create this sameness again, this sense of connection we remember from the time when we were connecting. And so there's this sort of refrain of, if you were just different, then everything would be okay. Or if I could be different, then everything would be okay. And it's a really challenging time in the relationship. And sometimes our codependencies show up, or our narcissistic tendencies show up. If you're at all worried or concerned or thinking you might have some narcissism in yourself or in your relationship, a really great book to look at is The Wizard of Oz and Other Narcissists. That's a great place to look at. If you're concerned about codependency and how you might be changing yourself in response to the people around you and taking on too much of their emotional life, you might want to look into some 12-step work around codependency. There's lots of literature out there. Pia Mellody's work and Melody Beatty's work, both of them are spectacular. And we actually arrive now where we are looking at a point of choice. And this is where we've gotten to the place in the relationship where it's so painful to be in the relationship that we need to make a choice. And usually there are two ways that we go. We can choose the path of punishment, which can lead to crazy making and misery, self-destructive behaviors, affairs, addiction, workaholism, hopelessness, depression, all that whole list of things, and ultimately can end in divorce or leaving the team or leaving the company if it's in a business setting, or leaving the friendship if it's a friendship where there's just a complete loss of the relationship. And the other path, though, is the path, Scott Peck famously called it the road less traveled. And I like to think of it as the path of power. It's hard work, but it does work. And I've listed here a couple of things, tools and things that can happen during this time of hard work, such as shadow work, or finding a really great therapist to work with, or getting into 12-step groups. If you have a contemplative or solid prayer life that could support you, and meditation and moving inward, it takes determination and a willingness to find and restore your sense of dignity to really move into the path of power. And this is where we're starting to recognize, okay, I have a relationship, and it's not who I am. I have a relationship, but I am not the relationship. In fact, we sort of take a step back from the relationship and see ourselves as separate, what Robert Keegan calls a third to fourth order shift in consciousness, where we begin to see, okay, I'm more than my relationship. I have a relationship, and therefore now I can work on the relationship, and I can begin to separate who I am and what's happening with me out from the dynamics that are going on in the relationship. And so when we decide, okay, I'm going to do this, instead of opting out of the relationship, I'm going to choose to work hard and see if I can get through this to what's at the root of what's happening here. We find ourselves on this road to transformation. And no matter how much, looking around we might do at this tool or that tool, or read this book or that book, what are sometimes called bibliotherapy. I certainly have engaged in a lot of that in my life, and with great reward. But nothing leads to transformation like getting to the point of surrender, where we really have made the decision that is much more painful to continue on the way we've been going than it is to do the painful work of beginning to heal, where we confront what's been driving our fears and our failures, what's behind our behaviors, what's behind our judgments. You know, we kind of just get tired of the crap, the crap we're telling ourselves and the crap we're hearing from other people, perhaps. So that's sort of the setup for what I want to talk about today, where there's this sort of pattern that we can see ourselves move through in relationships. And all of that leads us to the point where we're finally willing to be in acceptance. You know, our heart gets broken open, and we either keep the broken heart and go away, or we use that openness to see the wounding that's there from our history and decide to heal, decide we're going to take time on the healing journey. And for me, what was so profound in my own healing journey was coming to understand that there's really two aspects to looking at what I need to see that needs healing. And one of the aspects is my nature. What is it that's true about my physical body? And the other is the way I was nurtured and what is true about my history or my experience. Another way to think about it is I have my biography, my story of who I am, my history, my herstory, with all of my life experience and life events. And then I also have this biology that's part of my physical being and my physiology. And, you know, for a long time I didn't understand the importance of the biological aspect of the work. I was really much more focused on the mind and the psychological aspect of the work. And I'm really excited now that what my research has led me to is a more integrated approach that, you know, of course, we know intellectually we are one thing called a body-mind, but we still think of it as these two different parts, and they are intimately connected. And what I have learned is that for me to have a healing in the heart and the mind, the body has to be part of that healing process as well. So we're going to talk about these two types of healing, and I'm going to start with the biography side, with the nurture side. A lot of people may be sort of familiar with that aspect of it. And the question here is, what's your story? You know, what's your background? What kind of upbringing did you have? And how did that shape you and shape your ideas about yourself and shape your ideas about the world? And one of the things that we have learned is that when children are exposed to challenging times, especially before the age of 9, psychologically, we are at a time where we don't have a sense of being bounded as individuals. Psychologically, children at that age, part of why they're so happy-go-lucky and they're so free and they can get so lost in their world is because they feel themselves to be completely at one with their environment. There is a complete openness to the environment, which is also why when the environment is unsafe, even momentarily, when they fear something or they feel threatened, even if it isn't real, even if it's a movie, the child's body and mind is impacted deeply by those experiences. And it could be harsh words from a brother or a mother, or it could be something a teacher says that embarrasses us in front of our class, or a classmate on the playground. It could be a car accident or loss of a pet. Any of these things that for young minds can feel very traumatic, although we might not think of them as trauma with a capital T. They are moments snippets in time that do impact our sense of whether we're safe in the world and whether we're loved by those around us. And however we begin to think about ourselves, whether we start to think about ourselves that I'm not good enough, or I'm not loved enough, or I must not be adequate here, or I feel a whole host of things. I feel unsafe, I feel ashamed, I feel embarrassed. These things begin to go into what Jung described as the psychological shadow. And they are disowned aspects of ourselves that we have decided we don't want to look at because the people in our lives have somehow said, you know, that somehow we got the message that part of who we are is not acceptable. Or we experienced some kind of a fear that was so difficult to deal with that it got submerged in the subconscious. And Jung says that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. At all accounts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions. And, you know, we can all think of people, and maybe it's ourselves as well, that we know they are so gifted and talented and motivated, and they have great ideas, and yet every time they seem to start to get close to getting what they want in life or getting the relationship they want, something comes up and there's a moment of self-sabotage. You know, they don't perform when they really needed to, and they lose their job, or they start to get cocky and stop working hard, or within the context of the relationship, we might get to some place where it's, oh my gosh, it's starting to feel a little too good here, more than I'm used to and more than I can hold, and we begin to subconsciously do things that actually sabotage the happiness that we would like to have in our relationships. And all of that can be attributed to shadow and shadow material.
Rima, can I jump in here for a second?
Absolutely, anytime.
Yeah, because you're saying so much good things, and there's a couple places that I want to jump in, but it's just, you know, so wonderful what you're presenting. I just keep listening. But I wanted to say, you know, you're talking about biology versus biography and nature versus nurture. When we have things that are traumatic for us, regardless if they would be traumatic for someone else before that age of 9 and sometimes even before the age of 12, there's actually a change in our neurology. Mm-hmm. And so that can really change our brain function and our fear responses. Instead of going to, you know, the rational center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, it goes straight to the amygdala. And so the biology can even change. And so your biography and your biology begin to interweave with that. And that's even further pushed down into the shadow work. And I know you're going to talk about body work as well, but those are places where it gets stuck. It gets stuck in our body. It gets stuck in our brain. And we learn to keep functioning from this place of fear and anxiety and trauma. So I know I have several clients, even coaching clients, that a lot more people, because you're talking about the healthy self, are going more towards coaching instead of therapy. And even there, they're seeing, wow, they kind of relate their post-traumatic stress disorder, since a lot of people know what that is now, and they put that on every situation that's fearful, thinking that that's re-traumatizing them. So because of our, you know, the biology of it and the fear response, they see every fear that comes up as re-triggering their PTSD symptoms. I just thought that was interesting, kind of weaving that in here, how that goes together.
Absolutely, it does go together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's perfect timing to remind ourselves that the trauma and the response that I'm talking about, while I'm right now in the sort of biography side of things, absolutely has a mirror that's going on in the physiology, and that it's not just a mirror that's going on in the physiology, as you pointed out, that one impacts the other and reinforces the other, which then comes back and updates the sense of self as being, yes, confirmed, this is a problem, and then that pushes forward even more into this cycle that gets created, and the actual physical development of the brain begins to develop in such a way that it becomes our set point, where we're physically evolving based on these ideas, these fears, these moments of trauma. And it's like Carolyn Mace likes to say, our biography becomes our biology. Mm-hmm. So without a doubt, they're interlinked. So thank you, Veronica, for making that note.
Yeah, and you're just really pointing out the importance, because it gets mirrored in our relationships too. You're really pointing out, you can really keep going in exiting out of relationships and exiting out of jobs, but it's still going to be there.
Yeah. Wherever you go, there you are.
Right. You keep mirroring it everywhere you go. So that's even more importance about why even look at this stuff. Why do this
mm-hmm.
work? You're making a really good case for it. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So popping back to childhood now, what can happen in childhood is that all of the feedback that we get that begins to tell us that we should be different and more of this and less of that sort of comes together to create what we call, or what Jung calls, the social mask. And this is also something that shows up in the work of Roberto Assagioli, who was a contemporary of Maslow, an Italian psychologist who did some terrific work that I really like. And there are basically 5 main buckets through which we build our social mask starting in childhood. There's this pressure to conform. School is a really good one for that, but it starts as early as, when we're in our own household and there are expectations. And sometimes we have people, grown-ups in our life, who believe that the best way to serve a child is to kind of break the child so that they're now ready and willing to conform. Anything, of course, related to abuse and neglect. And there's a really terrific instrument called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Inventory, or ACEs, if people want to look that up. They've done a huge amount of research around this with the abuse and neglect categories. If you have 1 or 2 of these adverse childhood experiences, you are definitely impacted and even compromised as far as not just your psychological health, but your physical health going into the future. Your likelihood of developing certain diseases goes up. And when you get to 4 out of 10 on the list of these adverse childhood experiences, the impact is so dramatic that their cohort that they were studying were likely, at that point, with 4 or more of the ACEs, you could lose as much as 20 years of life expectancy due to the impact on your physical and emotional and psychological health. So, it's really, when we talk about it impacts your physiology as well as your story about yourself, it's 100% true. Another way we build the social mask is when we've been punished for exploring, and we begin to pull back and feel like the world is not safe. And punished can look like, just mom being frightened about us having our own natural curiosity. And then also stifling creativity, which is our personal authentic expression, where the whole art scars comes up, where people have been told by teachers, you're coloring it wrong, or your horse looks silly, or, that whole idea where whatever it is that is in our mind that we want to paint and draw and color the way we want to color, somebody tells us it's not okay. And at that age, we interpret that to mean, well, then I am not okay because I like this, and this is giving me great joy and great pleasure. And if the adult says it's wrong, then that must mean something's wrong with me. And, as we move along in life, we can over-identify with this social mask, and so our authentic self just gets completely pushed to the side. And these neglected aspects it's like having a gaggle of geese, that are always poking their head up trying to get your attention so that you will bring them back to you and back back into life with you. And shadow work is all about the process of going in and almost in a shamanic way, recapturing lost pieces of ourselves. So before I pop on and look at the way this impacts relationships, Veronica, is there anything that you want to add to that piece there?
No, I just think that's really great. I see so much in the newer developmental psychology really resonating here. There's so much to read that is new, and it's amazing because when I got my PhD and went through clinical psychology training, all of this wasn't really there. There were pieces of it, of course, Jung, but there's a lot more that has been done by Keegan and Suzanne Cook-Order and a number of other people that are just really adding to what is going on in childhood, but also much more in adulthood. It used to be that we ended looking at developmental stages pretty much in your young adult life, and then we went into retirement age, and that was it. There was nothing in between, and we're finding there's so much more. And one of the key points that you're talking about is the choice making about, do we go deeper into ourselves to develop ourselves more and surrender into even the unknowing, which really helps us to catapult into a deeper developmental stage. And I think you're really, showing the path for that. Can we stop for a moment and take questions from anybody else here?
Sure.
So if you have a question, I'm going to unmute everybody here, and you can ask a question. And if you're coming in from the webcast, you can write in your question. There's a box there that you can write in, and I just need to hit my little refresh button, and we can refresh. And so go ahead and type any questions, and first we'll take anybody who's on the phone. If you want to ask a question, feel free to ask the question at this point, or say hi, or whatever you'd like to do there. So we have a few people on the line, so I unmuted everyone. No questions there. And let me look back at the Q&A here. And you'll have another opportunity. So if you have some questions and you're not ready to ask them right now, we don't want to take too much time here. It takes a moment to refresh on my part here too. So we'll just go ahead and continue on. And then if there's questions towards the end, then we'll take those at the end as well. How's that? Does that work, Rima?
That's perfect. And
okay.
If somebody writes something in, let me know.
Yeah.
All right. So what does all this mean for us when we start to get in relationship? Well, there's this great quote by Michael Ventura that I love. He says, every one of us full of horror, meaning our shadows. If you are getting married to try to make yours go away, you will only succeed in marrying your horror to someone else's horror. Your two horrors will have the marriage. You will bleed and call it love. And it's very dramatic, but very true, that when we bring our unconscious shadow material into relationship, we have what feels like a conscious relationship going on between two people. But as we know from the research, when we get triggered, it's very seldom, there's a very small part of it that's about the issue that's happening right now. And the majority of our under or overreaction, because we can underreact by withdrawing and shutting down as well as overreacting, that those reactions are as much as 90% or even 95% by some standards a result of our hidden shadow material, a result of our biology and our biography from our past. And when we bring that into relationship, we end up just having two projections being in relationship with each other, two shadows being in relationship with each other. And when things are good, they're great. But when conflict comes up, we're not managing them from our best thinking self because we're off in our shadow material. And there's another incredible dynamic that occurs in a relationship where we start to separate out, and instead of being two whole people, it's like two halves coming together. And one person will embody or carry or express whatever are the disavowed or shadow traits of his or her partner. And then, so you've got, you know, in my relationship, for example, for a long time, I was the one whose job it was to express the anger. And my husband, he had the task of expressing the shame. You know, I personally think I got the better end of that deal. But for neither one of us, ultimately, did it work out because, you know, we're trying to have two fully integrated adaptive beings, but really we just kind of have one. The problem is that, you know, one partner's doing all the breathing out and the other one's doing all the breathing in, and that doesn't work. And at some point, my husband began to realize, you know what, I have a right to my own anger, and I want to be able to feel my anger. And I began to see that underneath my anger was a lot of hurt and shame. And when we both took back the parts of ourselves that we were leaving in the hands of our spouse, we had to do a lot of work for that integration, but it absolutely created a whole new freedom in our relationship because we were beginning to be more and more integrated on our own. And that's so important. You'll see that sometimes even with responsibilities, where you'll have one highly responsible person and one person who's more of the free spirit and less responsible. And really the reason that the responsible person is with the free spirit is that's a part of their disowned self that they very much want to be able to express. But, you know, the free spirit needs to take on some of the responsibility, which is a part of their disowned self, so that the teeter-totter, if you think of it like a seesaw, can move up and down. And both partners have opportunities to be responsible, and both partners have opportunities to be free-spirited. So important when we're talking about the health of our relationships to have that that balance. And it starts when we begin to notice what our shadow looks like. And I love this picture of Anakin Walker. If you can see in the background the shadow that's on the building behind him, who is that? I wonder who that guy is. That's his future, you know, Darth Vader. And that movie is a study in shadow work and the hero's journey to move toward integration and how sometimes that's generational. It can take generations for things to work themselves out. But it's often mortifying when we first see all that stuff that's under the hood, so to speak. Another great source is Robert Bly. He wrote a book called The Little Book on the Human Shadow, and he describes it as a long black bag filled with stuff that we have left behind in childhood. And usually it's about 30-ish or so in our 30s when it gets heavy enough for us to start saying, wait a minute, I'm living somebody else's life here. I need to look inside there and see what's in there and deal with it. And that's when we start with shadow integration. You know, the Toltecs, which is Don Miguel Ruiz's tradition, if you're familiar with the Four Agreements and the Mastery of Love, again, two great sources for wonderful tools, relationship tools. They call this work hunting power because in that spiritual tradition, the moment when we lean in, when we find an edge within us that feels challenging or difficult, and we choose to lean into that edge and overcome it and integrate it, it's like recapturing part of our spiritual power. You know, if you think about the feeling you have when you accomplish something that's really physically challenging or grueling, or when you overcome a big fear. You know, I remember that high I felt when I skydived for the first time. I felt so alive because I was recapturing this risk-taker part of myself that had gotten stuffed in my black bag when I was in childhood. Sometimes I still have to go, you know, deep into the bag to find it and pull it back out again, but I have integrated more of my ability to feel comfortable with the risk, and it's a way in which we can build our own personal power. And we do this by befriending the shadow. So here are just a few tips that you can put into practice if you want to see your shadow a little more clearly. It's impossible to see the shadow head on. That's why it's shadow. If you can see what 12 steps sometimes calls character defects, then they're not in shadow. They're things you're aware of. And those are great. We want to work on those. And then there are the things that we're completely not even aware are operating. And we can find some of those by soliciting feedback for others, uncovering our own projections, looking at slips of the tongue, considering how we do humor and the things we identify with, as well as looking at dreams and fantasies and things of that sort. So I'm really excited now about getting to the place where we look at the body story or the body shadow. This is a new passion of mine. When I first discovered, oh my gosh, my body has a shadow too. I mean, that was all news to me. When I was doing this work in the beginning, I thought it was all about what's going on in my head. And what I learned is there were some pieces of shadow material that I could do all the cognitive processes in the world with. I could do all the talk therapy. I could use the Q process, which I co-created with my colleague Gary Simmons and James Simmons. I could do all that work, but there were some things that were so stuck they wouldn't move, and those were things that were trapped in the body and in the nervous system. And the nervous system is filled with information in the form of energy, and it moves through our body all the time. And, you know, you were talking earlier, Veronica, about the trauma that we experience. And Peter Levine, who is a great source on trauma in the body, talks about trauma as being the most avoided, ignored, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. And I would have to say that that's absolutely true. And, you know, you talked about how important it was that trauma happens when it's traumatic to whoever the person is. It may not be traumatic to someone else, but it might be traumatic to me. And so when I perceive an event that's life-threatening, life-delving, life-deadening, or life-ending for myself or others, and it's accompanied by feelings of helplessness and terror, then that is a trauma for me. And it may not be for someone else, but it qualifies for me. And so the trauma is not in the event. It's in the nervous system. It's in the way that we interpret it. And what happens then is our instinctual responses come up where our body tells us we're in danger and we need to be ready to fight or to flee. And if we're in a situation, which is often what's true in childhood, where we cannot fight back or we cannot flee, we then use the default of the freeze response, which is really not good for human beings. Works great for possums and other animals of prey, not so good for humans because we have a hard time turning ourselves back on once we have our nervous system is in a state of freeze. Nature's plan for the human being and for large animals is really to move the energy. So there's been some great research that is available that animals, when they are being hunted, will have a natural shake, and they just sort of go into what looks a little bit like an epileptic fit, if you will, where all their limbs are continuing to move once they've gotten through a traumatic experience. And if they don't do this shake, then they're really in danger of dying. And in fact, when they release animals that have been captured and because they were hurt and they've been nursed back to health, before they release them into the wild, they're very mindful to watch that the animal has this shaking response so that it's basically resetting its nervous system so it's going to be able to survive. And why is that important? Because what happens is these are called truncated defense responses, when we don't get to finish moving that energy all the way through the body. You know, you can think very easily of somebody who's been sexually attacked or raped, that they have had to freeze in that moment and they don't get the chance to have their complete defense response. And this can be really habit forming because the brain is smart. So if something works, it's more likely to choose it again and again and again. And so you end up with people who physiologically and psychologically, as you were saying earlier with the PTSD, they go right back to that habit-forming response and perhaps shut completely down or go completely off. And then you can end up in a system where you're stuck on high, where you're completely over in the manic side of living, or you're stuck on low and disconnected and numb. This is what can happen in the autonomic nervous system. Fortunately, there are some tools that people can use to shift, and we have implemented these in our house with my daughter and my husband to understand the impact of what's going on in our nervous system. You can sort of see there's all these things that happen when we're on full tilt in the central nervous system, where the breathing rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, digestion goes down, all of these things that happen in moments of trauma. And, I had an incident just not that long ago where I moved in a weird way and I got a crazy kink in my back, and it released this whole sort of flood of judgment and story and emotion that was touching something that was really old, and the tears just came, and it was a moment where I could instinctually knew, wow, I'm in some long lost memory. I don't even know what it is here. And so I began doing what are some very important tools that I've learned for rapid shifting that help us bring us back to ourselves. As you said before, the neocortex goes offline, the thinking part of the brain goes offline, and I wanted to bring it back. So here are 4 strategies I'll go over quickly. They are grounding, where you take your attention out of the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system by noticing your feet and your hands and your back. So you just allow yourself to notice, and you'll feel your breath returning. Resourcing is sending your thoughts out to your happy place, wherever that might be. Tracking is sort of paying attention to what's going on in your body. Okay, I'm feeling a little pain here. I'm feeling a little tightness here. Okay, now I notice that, there are my feet, or wow, there's something going on my knees. It brings your observer online. And then the 4th one that's very useful is somatic release or movement. If you've ever been in an argument and said, you know what, let's take a break, and then gone out for a run and come back, and now suddenly you can have a great conversation, that's called somatic release. And this is the idea of doing bottom-up processing, body processing, along with top-down or cognitive processing that leads us to really begin to move into conscious connection to self, where now we're recovering our whole heart, where we have gotten clear about our biology and our biography, and we know what our shadows are. And we want to begin now to step back into the partnership portal and begin to look at how we move into mastery. And so now we're looking at opportunities. Every time a trigger comes up, it's no longer our partner's fault that we're upset. Now we can see this is an opportunity for me to have a skillful response in the midst of what would have set me off before, and to become curious about what's going on with me and with my partner, and to renegotiate roles so that I'm doing it from a place of clarity rather than from my shadow. To look at how I can be accountable for my actions and how I set boundaries, and moments where I'm willing to let myself be vulnerable. Very, very important. And once we've done enough of this sort of mastering and practice of being true to ourselves and doing our own personal work, and then showing up more and more skillfully and more masterfully in our relationships, we eventually get to this place called, what I like to call the Garden of Gratitude, where differences are no longer scary. And now it's totally fine that we see the world in different ways. In fact, not only is it fine, it's an asset to us as a couple. You know, that I can see you look at this differently, and I'm grateful because you're tracking all these things that I'm not tracking over here. And now we are better together because we're different, and we have a whole huge capacity to honor and respect and appreciate the differences that we see in our partner. And then we find that we're moving to this place of being in a consciously connected relationship where we're more resilient because we're consciously connected to ourselves. And now we're freely giving our heart to our partner. We're not expecting them to be anything different other than they are. And we know that it's okay for us to bring who we are to the table, and that all of us is welcome, even the shadowy places that we're still working on, and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with one another. Now, the interesting piece of this is that once we get there, we're not done. This is a lifelong journey of lather, rinse, repeat, you know, where we find ourselves, when we're consciously connected, back in a place of magical mystery again. This is wonderful. We're back in love again, and everything is wonderful. And then the challenges will arise again, and the difference is that we can move through this cycle more quickly each time once we've really made it all the way through the first time. Now we're not afraid of it. You know, we might still be resisting it a little bit, but we know that it'll be okay because there's great stuff coming on the end. And the more we do it, the more delighted we find ourselves being at the opportunity to create yet greater intimacy with ourselves and our partner. And ultimately, I think that that's what we're looking for in life. That's how we create resilient relationships. They are relationships where we are willing to meet the challenge head on and bounce back from it and use it to our advantage to create greater and greater levels of intimacy. And so just for those of you who might be interested in a little bit of reading to look a little further into some of this work, here's a little list of some books: Romancing the Shadow, which is a collection of essays. I already mentioned Robert Bly's book, the little book on the human shadow. My Insight by Daniel Siegel, who talks about this relationship between how our story helps to create our neural architecture. Peter Levine's work on healing trauma, and The Trauma Spectrum by Robert Scare. These two gentlemen both do a great job discussing the impact of trauma. And then the part down there on the bottom are my pieces of work that I've developed with Gary and Jane Simmons. You can find all of that work on theqeffect.com.
Wow. Awesome. You know, part of going through that cycle that you're talking about and coming back around to it, I've found in my life, is really about trusting the process. And I've facilitated a ton of groups through my career, and the more that people learn the process of saying, ouch, this hurts, or this is uncomfortable, getting more experience and comfort with bringing up that conflict and doing it earlier before the conflicts grow and get big. I think trusting that process helps you move through it much more quickly, too, and having those safe places to go to, as you talked about. I think that really takes down the threat process. And, you know, and how you've presented all this, Rima, it really takes the shame out of it. And I think that shame is what keeps that shadow part of ourselves hidden and keeps telling, you know, we keep telling ourselves, our critic keeps saying, no, you can't bring up that conflict. You know, you're the one rocking the boat. All those things keep us pushing that part down and keep us in shame. And you've just really opened up, hey, here's some rapid shifting. Here's some ways to deal with this, that it's not about making it right or wrong. It's just that it is. We all have this, and it's part of what makes us human.
Absolutely. And these are moments of time in relationships, snapshots, you know, that many, many relationships go through this cycle. This is, as you say, a normal part of human relating. This is nothing that's unique. I mean, when we talk about norming, storming, reforming, which is all that interior work, and then performing when we come together in a place of mastery, I mean, this is a known cycle. And we often, as you say, feel shameful that we're in a storming period in our relationship. Like, you know, aren't we supposed to be better than this? Or if we're in a storming period, it means, well, clearly this is not the right person for me. But it may be that I'm not being fully me. And the whole point of relationship is to show that to me so that I can do this healing work.
Right. It's the imago, as Harville Hendricks calls it. It's the mirroring of that whoever comes into our life, we mirror all that. So I really like the cycle and how you showed that, because we can jump out, you know, when things get tough, we can jump out of one relationship after another, but that will just keep following us. So you've really taken all of this information and synthesized it in a really easy to understand way. It was really great. I'd like to add one more thing to the rapid shifting, and that comes from Daniel Siegel, and that is placing one hand over your heart in the middle of your chest and one just under your diaphragm, your upper belly, and that is a self-soothing technique that Daniel Siegel found is really important for using for comforting and self-soothing and calming the nervous system. And he's done a lot of work with infants, you know, through adulthood. So it's pretty amazing the work that he's done in the neuroscience part of it. So that was really great. We had some people on the phone, and it seems that they've dropped off. You know, we've come upon our hour and past it, and I know people are busy and have to get back to what they were doing. But let me ask you, someone is interested in your research. They didn't put their name in there. And what exactly is your research that you're doing, and want to know more about your research? And I think that you and I spoke about you coming back on and presenting again after you've collected and written your dissertation. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. So my research is primarily working in the biography side of things, and what I will be studying is looking at this tool that we've created, this shadow work practice called the Q process. That's a 21-day practice, and using that as the intervention and studying and assessing whether we can in a statistically significant way, improve people's self-awareness and self-compassion. Those are the two indicators that we are looking for. And that's going to be happening this fall. And I'll be looking for people in the Kansas City area who would like to participate in that study. There will be no cost to them to move through the tool. And it comes to a workshop and then a self-guided practice with coaching sessions. And I hope to be able to come back and report that we actually have found something that can indeed support people in increasing their capacity to be more self-aware and to be more compassionate with themselves, which are two key components of being able to actually have a shadow work practice stick and make a long-term difference.
Right.
We need to be able to be gentle, and we need to be aware of when things are starting to go offline so that we can intervene, as you had said earlier, more quickly before it becomes too overbearing, too difficult.
Right. And everything we're about with raising consciousness now is about creating a better world. And we really can't do that until we do our own work, because if we can't show our self-compassion, if we can't be that compassionate self towards ourselves, we really can't do that for other people. And and a lot of people say, no, that can't be right. I take care of a lot of people in my life. Yeah, but at what expense to them and to you? It's when you have your own self-compassion that you take care of yourself as well, if not better, than you take care of other people, that other people are free to be who they are too. But if we're always in there rescuing, then we don't allow the other person to be who they need to be either. So again, that shadow work, that mirroring effect that we have in relationships. So that self-compassion is so important. And because you're measuring that, I'm thinking that you've done this for quite a few years now, that you have actually seen that that is the result of doing the 21-day process and the shadow work that you've been doing. Is that right?
That's true. We have a huge amount of anecdotal evidence that not only does this create greater levels of self-awareness and self-compassion in individuals, but entire spiritual communities have seen their cultures shift completely when the majority of the community, or the key leaders especially in the community, go through the practice and begin to use the principles in their way of relating with each other. And so as with all good research, it has to be subjected to the scientific method of some level of objectivity, or at least the most objective we are able to be in a participatory universe. We are looking to get some quantifiable results where we can actually look at numbers and measure and see, is there statistically significant evidence that this is working.
Right. Okay. So you know that it's true from what people are saying, and that's their experience. So now you're going to show by research that you can find that that's true. So awesome. Well, I would love for you to come back maybe in the spring, and present that.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. And I want to say, we're running out of time here, and that you have written a really wonderful article on raisingconsciousnessnow.com, and people can reach you by going to the Q Effect, the Q, like capital Q, effect.com, and they can also email you, and they can also find you on Raising Consciousness Now. That's probably the easiest way to go, raisingconsciousnessnow.com, and Rima has a page there, so you can go to that. And if you're in the Kansas City area, definitely jump in there and get some free coaching and free experience with this wonderful tool. Well, Rima, this is incredible. I love the work that you're doing and the way that you're making this planet a better place to live for generations to come. You're a really special person, and I really thank you for doing this and being here for us. And all of the work that we do on Raising Consciousness Now is free. And Rima is donating her time to do this today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It makes my heart sing. It's why I believe I'm here. And I really hope that people have found the information useful. And I definitely encourage them to connect with me and contact me. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really grateful to you, Veronica. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. That's awesome. Okay, and this will also be a video on YouTube if you want to watch it again. So take care, everyone, and until next time, next month, we will have Nancy Hay for our webinar and our teleseminar next month. I'm not sure what date, but we'll send out an email. If you're not part of our email list, go to raisingconsciousnessnow.com and sign up for our email list there. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.